big shout out to the Senator's son, Kenny Inoue, who has just moved back and is a brand new resident of Honolulu. The senator felt very strongly and worked his entire career to bring federal resources and bring a little bit of national to Hawaii, feeling that it was important that Hawaii was never forgotten in levels of support. He also felt increasingly as important was that there was a lot that Hawaii could teach Washington and our national lawmakers. And so those two values kind of tied together bind us and the partnership that you see tonight. And our topic in other cities could be a very sensitive topic. But as we know in Hawaii, when you talk about race, there's got to be a little humor. And so those of you that were here a little early, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of Frank DeLima and Brett Replinger. And also, we also know that when we talk about sensitive issues like race, there has got to be food. So after this excellent panel is over, we ask you to join us next door for the Melting Pot Challenge. We have 3 very hot chefs next door. They are preparing their best shot using different ethnic foods. They will be judged by this panel, and then you will enjoy their delicacies. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Gregory Rodriguez of Zocola.
It's really remarkably cool to be introducing the program wearing this. Thank you. We're grateful to the Inoue Institute for making tonight's event possible. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jill. And thank you, Honolulu. We are a small nonprofit in Los Angeles. We work with the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History and SoCo Public Square launched an ambitious multi-year, multi-platform national conversation which asks about our shared past as a way, questions about our shared past as a way to understand the present and to imagine our national future. We publish 2 high-quality, widely syndicated ideas pieces a week that we syndicate to 300 partners around the world, and we present free public programs in 10 cities from Honolulu to Miami. This year we've already featured the likes of Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, rock legend Eddie Van Halen, Girl Scout CEO Ana Maria Chavez, and with all the political and social forces that tear us apart, What It Means to Be American seeks to foster discussion about what all Americans have in common. We encourage you to go to the website whatitmeanstobeamerican.org, where tomorrow you'll find a full write-up and a video and audio of tonight's event to share with anyone who could not be here tonight. We invite you to also join the site to tell your own stories, and if there's any stories you think we should be telling about the American people and what we have in common. If you haven't yet, like to take part in tonight's conversation, we will be tweeting with the hashtag WIMTA, W-I-M-T-B-A, What It Means to Be American, from our handle @thepublicsquare. If you haven't already, please silence your cell phones and try to only use your cell phones if you're tweeting something cool about the program. As Jennifer said, but she neglected the important part. Seriously, we're having food next to us, but we're having drinks as well, which we feel is always really good at getting people getting along with each other. Afterwards, we'd like you to invite you all to talk further with each other and with tonight's guest. You go outside and see the warehouse to the right. And now I'm really pleased to introduce tonight's moderator, Ms. Leslie Wilcox. Leslie Wilcox, as you know, is the host of Long Story Short on PBS, offering engaging, akamai, one-on-one conversations with some of Hawaii's most intriguing people. Leslie brings out the personal stories, revealing experiences, and core values that mold the people who shape your community. Please give a warm welcome to Leslie Wilcox.
Thank you all so much for being here. Has everyone been to Kaka'ako Agora before? This new view. And inside the park, Public Square. Well, I'm so glad to be here with these smart and thoughtful guests. And this isn't going to be a panel discussion that's traditional. It's not a panel discussion. Let's consider it a conversation. with some people who have richly textured lives, shall we? So I don't have a big opening statement to ask you for. I don't have a long list of scripted questions. We're just going to talk. And afterward, Q&A, as you were told before. So with me here, Guy Kawasaki. Who only has 1.46 million Twitter followers. He's a marketing executive, a social media guru, author, art, social media, and many other books. Born in Kaliki Valley, went to Iolani, and then off to Ivy League schools, and now lives in Northern California. Thank you for being here, Guy. Maya Sotoro Ng, I should say Dr. Maya Sotoro Ng. She's a director of the Matsunaga Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. But not the big director. Okay. This kind of director. And she's an author. She's taught at many high schools in New York and Hawaii. She was born in Jakarta, Indonesia. She's the half-sister of the President of the United States, who was indeed born in Hawaii. Next, Daniel J. Kim. He is an actor in the hit television series Hawaii 5-0, which is shooting somewhere on the island tomorrow. Before that, there was the hit series Lost. He's very versatile in the television industry and in acting. He's a director and most recently a producer. Born in South Korea, grew up in New York and Pennsylvania, now lives most of the time in Hawaii, but you spent time in LA and New York as well. We're very happy to have you here today. Who was born to a very large family in a very small house in Kailua. He is a retired top banker, First Hawaiian Bank, former retired executive vice president. Is now the vice president of the Heritage Net Weinberg Foundation and is heavily involved in leadership in community affairs in Hawaii from the standpoint of both leader and also, I think, could I say servant? He's followed the model of servant leader. So we're very happy to have Corbett here today. So I guess I'll take this out. He said to make love to the mic. Okay, so which one do I use? I'll just use both. So, let's do this really simply. You know the question of the moment, and we know that Hawaii is the most racially diverse state in the nation. We're the most isolated landmass in the world, and I think Time Magazine said once, good thing people do get along pretty well because it's hard to get out of here. We want to ask you, anybody want to weigh in on the subject of what can Hawaii teach America about race?
Oh my.
Okay, I'll start. I think that Hawaii can teach America a lot about race. And, I say that with certain caveats. We still have room to grow. Last night I was at the East-West Center Gala. We were honoring Nainoa Thompson, and he was talking about how the East-West Center was going to find its island. And there was this idea that, as navigators, we are all kind of still passionate and committed to the search. And so this idea that Hawaii, just like the rest of the nation, has room to grow, I think is something that we should be thinking about as we're here today. But I want to just say that I'm really happy that we're having these dialogues, and I'm grateful to Zocalo. I'm also grateful to the DKI Institute, and this is something that I want my students, my children to be able to do on a regular basis, to think about naming themselves and their place in their community, and having these dialogues and reflections are a great opportunity to do that. And definitely I'm happy that my daughters are growing up in Hawaii, where I think we all know that people of every racial and ethnic background have contributed substantially to making relatively harmonious and peaceful and well-functioning and fun community. I think that my husband, I don't know if he's here, but hey Conrad, he works for the director of the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. I'm so proud of you. But when he was growing up, he didn't grow up with the same level of diversity and sort of normalized multiculturalism, multilingualism, and intermarriage and mixedness. And you know, he told me, and I hope it's okay that I shared this, but he was pushed down on his bike one day, and people kind of chased after him and were very intimidating and said stuff like, "Oh, me Chinese, me make joke, me go pee pee in your Coke," you know, and it was not funny. It was harmful and hurtful, and those are things that I know that our daughters will never ever face. Really, Savita and Suhaila are in a place where they have access to a lot of people who will embrace them. Not simply because there are a lot of mixed race people, but because there is, I think, a strong sense of community. And I think about Hawaii, one of the positive things is also that we have a strong connection to tradition. People do a pretty good job of doing the Bon Festival and I think you're probably winding me up. I'm taking too long. But, you know, the Makahiki and, you know, the Okinawan Festival, all of these things that kind of, in addition to the farms and the lobi, you know, the taro, the fish ponds, and these wonderful places of indigenous reforestation remind us where we come from, where we've been, but also allow us to explore new generations of meaning making through tradition.
I notice when I ask people, you know, what are you? Because you ask that in Hawaii, right? You don't do that on the mainland, but you ask Hawaii. They say local. Often it's the shared part of the culture. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, for me, growing up in Hawaii, I didn't want to Chinese for English Spanish. I'm local. Yeah, I'm a foot dog. When you look at it, you know, I grew up in a family of 11 kids, 900 foot home, but it was a very rich time. And I think as I was preparing, driving in today, and I was thinking about the potential questions that we ask, we talk about racial diversity and what way we can teach race, teach about race. When you look at it, racial diversity is so rich. As I reflected on growing up in Hawaii, I grew up right near Buzz's Steakhouse. Buzz's Steakhouse, in that quarter-mile stretch, there are 60 families. And just to give you a sense of the racial diversity, we had the Gonzalez family, the Williams, the Hobbs, the Lampicocks, the Bargellas, the Kamai, the Kibbs, the Kakas, the Silvas, the Esposito's, the Granbergs. And you had that great mixture. And we grew up around it. And you see such a richness. There was a great deal of embracement. And we talk about in Hawaii a lot about aloha. And when you look at it, Hawaii's feeling for aloha in all of us in here, and the willingness to go and include people, and to be caring, and to be kind, and to be willing to humble oneself to serve. It's a message that's so universal, but we all get to experience it. And you know, growing up with being exposed to the various cultures, my grandmother and my dad's side was pure Portuguese. So I learned all the Portuguese language part. And the ladies would come down and sit on the veranda, and we'd learn about that. But when I went to visit my Hawaiian grandmother, there was no veranda, there was a lanai. Right? And you go through it, you learn these different things, and you see the similarities, and you see the appreciation that one has for each of the cultures. And so there's such a richness here, and diversity is so important to teaching the people about race.
Daniel?
Well, you know, the only thing, I guess I could start off by saying one of the things that Hawaii has to teach the rest of the country about race is reflected in the audience here today. If you look around, I mean, if you look around and see yourselves the way we could, you know, you see almost every race represented in the audience. Right? We're here talking and celebrating diversity as opposed to and being about crisis or anguish, like so much of the rest of the country. So, you know, the fact that we're all here together.
Apparently my theater training didn't pay off. But you know, as someone who wasn't born on the islands, and someone who had lived most of his life on the mainland with a very, very different attitude and upbringing toward race, it is one of the most refreshing things about living here is that there is an awareness of race, but not a judgment about race. And that's a critical distinction in my mind. One of my favorite stories when it comes to race in my family is one that I've shared before, but I'll share with you now. I grew up in a steel town in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where the majority of the population had a last name that ended in ski or wits. So it was like big blue collar, everyone was burly, you worked for the steel. And so being the only Asian family in that town led to a lot of experiences like Maya was saying that Conrad had. I was singled out on a regular basis for how I looked. The word cheap for me was something that I heard as soon as I heard the word love or hate. I mean, it was part of my vocabulary very early on. Now, when we moved to Hawaii, when my wife and my son were, my son was 13 years old, he came up to me one day and he said, "Daddy, what's a cheap?" And I thought, okay, that's pretty good. He's 13 years old. I heard it when I was 5. He's doing pretty good. So I took a deep breath, and then I sat down with him and I prepared to have that talk about, well, you've got to understand that some people will criticize you based on how you look. And I was thinking, I was preparing the entire speech. And so my first question was, well, who called you that? And he said, nobody. I read it in a book. And to me, that sums up Hawaii to me, that he can go that long, and have and live in harmony with so many different races, and it never come up that that racial epithet in that way is told me how progressive this culture really is, and it made me really, really glad to be able to raise my family here. I consider it a privilege because it is, to me, the most racially harmonious place where you can live and still speak English as your first language.
Daniel, now you've lived more time away from Hawaii than in Hawaii. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I think what everybody's saying basically is that Hawaii can offer a lesson that it can work. That, by default, we don't have to have these issues. I think there is an example, maybe the only example, but at least there is an example that it can work. The second thing I think Hawaii can teach is a matter of perspective. When I went to the mainland, I think if you come from Hawaii and you go to the mainland, you have a very different perspective because you're so used to a situation where everybody is so different. And I'll tell you a story, almost as good as Daniel's. And so I was living with my wife in San Francisco on Union Street, and right where Union Street dead ends into the Presidio. So it's a very nice area. It's kind of the Waialaikahala of San Francisco. And so one day I was outside and I was trimming the hedge. And this older white woman comes up to me and says, "You are doing such a great job with the hedge. Do you also do lawns?" And I was all set to just go off on her. How dare you? You think just because I'm Japanese, I must be a gardener. And about that time, my father visited me. And my father, I'm Sansei, he's Nisei. And I told him the story, and I fully expected him to say, "How dare that white woman stereotype you and pigeonhole you as a gardener just because you're Japanese?" And to my utter surprise, he said, "Son, mathematically, she was probably right." So don't take it personally and get over it. And that was a fundamental story in my life. The second story, a few years later, I interviewed Condoleezza Rice, and she grew up in Bull Durham, Alabama, where there are fire-hosing black people, and Ku Klux Klan, just the worst case, Alabama. And she said, Guy, I grew up in these terrible conditions of prejudice, violence, and all that, but I never considered myself a victim. And she went on to explain that if you consider yourself a victim, then it changes your entire perspective. That all of a sudden it's not your fault, and all of a sudden you can't do anything about it. All of a sudden, there's all these excuses. So once you accept the victim perspective, you become a victim. And those two stories fundamentally changed my life.
Okay, we're giving Hawaii very good reviews on racial attitudes. We're not perfect, right? We're not a racial paradise, I believe. Can we talk about that too? I mean, we can teach America about race, but we might be able to teach them by examples that aren't flattering as well.
Well, I'll give an example. I think my wife is English-German. He's 5'10", she's a swimmer, blonde hair, and it's not unusual here in Hawaii still. And it's a matter of education and the guy's point, how we respond to it. To always look to see, well, maybe this individual was raised in an environment that fosters perspective. It's not unusual for my wife and I to go to one of our supermarkets and have me standing right there with her, walk up after the groceries have been put and run through the counter. They have the person at the register asking, are you together? That's happened a number of times. We've got wedding in town and everything. So you look at that and I chuckle nowadays. I'm like Guy. My initial reaction, burning on the inside, and I've learned over the time that you've got to educate people, and you come through and say, oh no, we're married. Aren't I fortunate? You play with it. But it's something that still exists, and I think it's something that we have to take a step back off. And with our growing up in Hawaii, you learn to be patient. You have to be patient. And recognize there's such a huge diversity of people and influenced by so many different factors as we were growing up in different places, some more affluent than others. Because many people that have grown up in Hawaii, who pointed out that he grew up in a very affluent part of Hawaii, had that same impact on me when I was a child. It wasn't only visiting mainland states and different things. That happened right here where I grew up in Kailua. And I won't point out the place, but there are different places within Kailua that there are areas that were just really poor, and there are other areas that were very, very affluent. And so you see that. So it's a constant reminder that we've got to continue to educate one to, and Aloha tells us to do that, to care for people, to be sensitive, and but recognize that it's still there. And it's not something that goes away. And I think when you look at Hawaii and what you look at some of the root causes, there have been issues with respect to economic status, economic availability, financial viability, and that type of thing, which tends to manifest itself. The easy thing is to go back to, as Guy said, to say it's because of my ethnicity. And my father too raised us never to see it as a blessing. See your ethnicity, see your ethnic group as a blessing, but never use it as a reason for not stepping things.
Can I tell you a funny story? I don't know if it supports or hurts what I just said and what I just heard, but just to give you just sort of slice of life. So in my role as a venture capitalist and a business person, I meet with many entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs always have to pitch investors to invest in their company. So one day, I meet with this black entrepreneur. And it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. He says, Guy, I just pitched a company, and I'm going to pitch, I just pitched a venture capitalist. I'm about to pitch another one in the afternoon. Do you have any tips for me about how to improve my pitch? So I said to him, is your background black? And he says, yeah, I grew up in Atlanta, I am black. I said, no, I meant the color of your PowerPoint background. So, I don't know what that has to do with anything, but it's a great story.
I'm going to be thinking about that one. I definitely think, in my university setting, we have lots of opportunities for dialogue and structured academic controversies. And so, for me, I definitely want to emphasize that it's really important that we don't get complacent, and that, the thing about having relative harmony and living in a wonderful place is that sometimes a couple of things happen. One is we look at ethnicity, we make, there's ethnic humor in South Dilema, and we make assumptions that this is okay, but in fact, it can be hurting young people, impacting the way that they think of themselves, their communities. And so we do often need to compensate with this strength-based approach to culture, making sure that we understand, each child's, Manan place, so that they have a space to vocalize, express, to engage in meaningful dialogue safely. And I do think that sometimes we are also a little bit afraid of confrontation and discomfort here in Hawaii because, I get it because everyone is my auntie, or I've actually become old enough that I'm their auntie now, which is a little bit of a drag, but I'm going to embrace it. You're not either, I'm sure. But I do think that because we don't want to do any harm to the to this sense of ohana and family and community. Sometimes we are conflict adverse, but discomfort is really important to help us kind of again find our island. And Inouye himself, I'm thinking about the Inouye Institute. He was all about social justice, and so we definitely need to, at the same time, and we can do it with love and positive energy and optimism, but we need to uncover sort of some of the inequalities and social justice issues that we can be working on a little more effectively here, because there are racial and ethnic components to those inequalities.
Corbett, thank you, Maya. Corbett mentioned this in terms of marriage. 3 of you have interracial marriages, and interracial marriages, and multiracial children. And I think maybe that may be one of the areas where there's some lingering, because it's so family, right? I can remember one of my best friends, Japanese-Korean wedding, lots of reverberations about that, and that wouldn't be a factor on the continent, right? To Asians, but here, that could be a factor.
Hello? Here we go. I was thinking about...
You need the table.
Oh yeah, right.
Moving on.
That's right. I was thinking about that question, this afternoon as I was kind of pondering the panel a bit. I think one of the distinctions that Hawaii has is that, the Hawaiian population was integrated so early on, and we had the Japanese and the Chinese coming over in the 1800s, and the Koreans coming over in the 1900s, and the Portuguese and Filipinos coming around that time as well. And so there was an integration at a level that didn't exist in the rest of the mainland, and I think that's really important. Also, those immigrants were coming in at a working class level, and so they were not coming in as upper class. They were not colonizing the way that the Howleys, quote unquote, were seen as doing early on. And so there was it seems to me that there was a little bit of, we are all the same, right off the bat. And when Hawaii became a state, what's interesting is that all the, quote unquote, minority populations were already established. And so it really did represent a population that was integrated, and it was represented by 2 senators, Senator Inouye being the most notable, that was there from the beginning, and you had your first Asian American senator. So, I think it makes a difference that the history of Hawaii's integration is so deep, and the way the people that came and immigrated had a serious effect on the level of comfort that the different ethnicities had in one another.
And also, we didn't have enslavement, but we did have colonialism. We did have plantation days, and there was definitely discrimination. People still talk about how the old days have a kind of a glow about them, but there are also some evil memories coming on plantation days as well.
Exclusion, Chinese exclusion, the Japanese internments, they were all part of our history as well. That said, we still have the fewest hate crimes of any state, 22 hate crimes since 2002, and that's, you can argue the methodology of that, but, that statistic does say something.
I do think that one of the contributing factors is the fact that we've got these numerous types of different diverse cultures that are here. There's also an appreciation of the different cultures and an opportunity for those cultures to continue to flourish. But people saw the similarities within each one of those cultures, and we saw that. And we were all taught through our life experiences to see the value of the person, not necessarily what they did, but look at the person, and not necessarily the color of their skin. One thing that I was reflecting on, Daniel was talking, I worked on the Financial Modernization Act bill with the senator in DC for years, and I remember being in a meeting in the Mayflower Hotel on Connecticut Street, and Walter Dodge, who's a mentor of mine, is sitting there with me, and his meeting's been going on for several days, and I sit there, and he comes up and he whispers in my ear, "Robert, what do you notice?" And I looked around and said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "What do you see?" I said, "Oh, people in suits." You know, and my actual response to him, he says, "You're the only one that's colored in the group." And I realized at a very young age that I was never taught to see color. And you never think about that, and I was raised around that. And in Hawaii, I have a Portuguese panceta head, right? Experimental. Everybody went to get the stomachs fixed up and different things. And you only had to be that because we saw the person all the time. And you raised that.
That actually reminds me of a story as well. I'm going to name drop for a second, but I don't think he'd mind. I'm friendly with an actor named Jason Scott, who most of you know. And when I first met him, it was in Los Angeles, and we were at an audition where they were looking for Asian males only. And, you know, I was talking to him the way I usually talk to other Asian males in the audition room, because we all know each other because we all audition for the same parts. So we do the circuit together. But, you know, I was talking to Jason one day, and I was like, wow, isn't it crazy that, you know, there's this particular audition had, you know, a diversity and ethnicity, and it's very surprising. So I said, isn't it crazy that, you know, we've got like white people here and Latinos here and Asian people here? And he was like, I don't even see it. I'm like, you don't recognize it? He said, no, growing up in Hawaii, I never see that kind of thing. And I just remember being so taken aback by that, because my upbringing had taught me to always be aware of the race politics of every room. And I thought how freeing it must be for Jason to just think of himself as an actor, and to never think of himself as an Asian American actor, because race wasn't part of a chip on his shoulder to kind of succeed. He never felt marginalized or excluded because of the way he appeared. And I think that had a lot to do with his success as an actor up until today. He's one of the freest people that I know in that sense. And if we can kind of instill that in everyone, I think it would be an amazing afternoon for not just actors, but for people.
How do you teach people not to see color, though?
It's very, very difficult, you know, because you can't escape your surroundings, you know. But it's nice to know that in a place like Hawaii, it's possible. It's not only possible, it happens. So.
Yeah, I want to ask all of you about, you know, what was said for so many years, Hawaii is a melting pot. And I think, yes, I see heads shaking. What are we if we're not a melting pot?
I think we're a salad. I do. I think, you know, every ethnicity is represented as an ingredient in the salad. They're not mixed together, they're not blended together, they're not melted together. They are unique in their own characteristics. And, you know, to extend a terrible metaphor, maybe the dressing is really, you know, our citizenship, our American citizenship. That is what adds flavor to us all. And it's kind of the final compliment to all the other ingredients.
Anybody else? Because there will be a cooking competition coming up, and there'll be an attempt, a contest to represent Hawaii in terms of a dish. So you can check that out in the store.
I think maybe we can find some culturally responsive metaphors like bento mas chop suey. We got to represent that, but you know, I do think like there is something ceremonial about food. You know, whether you're watching Fort Bombay or the noodle factories here, but there is something powerfully emblematic in that. I don't know that we found our salad's pretty good. Got to figure out, got to the wonton chip wonton or something. But I think definitely there are opportunities in you were asking, like, how do we teach people to not see color? I don't know that we can do that, but I do think that we can certainly. I do peace education, and so I have to believe that we can teach peace, and that's sort of part of it. Where that's not the only point of connection and conversation. I think there are we need to look at peace as very action-oriented, and I wanted to point out to everyone that it is International Peace Week coming up, and International Peace Day. If you go to, if you're able tomorrow at 3, we are having a conversation at the law school hosted by the Montserrat Institute of Peace, looking at MOFA, the Conflict Free Association, the Micronesian community here in Hawaii, and you know how the Micronesian community is doing here in Hawaii and in the nation. There will be leaders from the community there and ongoing dialogue facilitated there. We also at the Montserrat Institute teach a lot of classes in negotiation, conflict resolution, mediation, facilitation, the history of nonviolence and theory of, and, you know, I think that I teach a peace education class, and a lot of what we do is we really understand how to see things from multiple perspectives. I think here in Hawaii and around the nation there needs to be perhaps a revisiting, and there is, I think, still very much a tendency to teach multicultural ed as our culture is bounded and finite and done, completely understood and very tidy, and instead of looking at you know, the collisions and the movement and the migration and the negotiations, and we do, instead of debate, structured academic controversies where you have to argue one side, then you argue the next. You foster empathy through learning to listen carefully. Teachers do think, pair, share normally, but we do think, pair, listen, share, where you know they have to listen to one another and then share with the whole group, be in charge of each other's stories. I think here in Hawaii, we're in a place of such powerful oral culture. There is an opportunity to enliven those oral traditions and teach oral histories. We have a wonderful oral history institute at the University of Hawaii. These are places where we can begin to contextualize some of the race and ethnicity and embedded in stories, you know, really understand the experience of folks in the plantations and Kanaka Maoli and Hawaiians, and in a way that means that we can talk about race and these other things productively and lovingly, but would not depoliticize it. You know, there's lots of fun ways.
You mentioned Kanaka Maoli, and let's talk about race and Hawaiians, because there's a very deep-seated feeling going back. I mean, if we're talking about race, which is all about history and power and question of equality, in order to get along so well, you have to feel at people's stake, I think. And we're hearing from Hawaiians, we're looking at poverty rates and incarceration rates. Any thoughts about that? The first people in Hawaii.
I think it's just, again, back to my original premise that you've got to see values here. You know, it's on both ends. You look at the Hawaiian community itself, they tend to occupy the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. You have examples of Hawaiians within the various groups that have been able to pull themselves out, but there's still a huge responsibility. And that's a combination of factors that have impacted that. But my point about growing up, you know, my great-grandmother had 22 children, right? My mom had 11. We had one of those smaller families, but the whole point they're deeply in love. On your part, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. No TV in those days, I guess. No, the whole point there is that my point is when you start looking at that, you look at the hardship. I mean, that's a huge discussion. But when you talk about the diversity and the value of Hawaii as a team with respect to race, it's going to start, because even within those families, it starts one person at a time. Each one of us asking ourselves how we can care for the other, how our actions impact those around us. And that's the beginning part of it. I think growing up in Hawaii, I experienced more of that type of approach to things, being concerned about the community. And so, you know, with Daniel he's talking about that, you start looking at families at a time, and I get back to my cultural appreciation piece. I've got, like I said, I'm Hawaiian Chinese, Portuguese, English, Danish. My wife was German, so my children had to add German to their. Well, my son got married to an Indonesian Dutch girl. My grandchildren are Hawaiian Chinese, English, Danish, German, Indonesian Dutch. But part of it is, the point I'm raising is that acknowledging an appreciation in the diversity, acknowledging that it's important for them to understand that the world has changed, and people are looking at these various groups and spending time as families and individuals, because that's where the trust is to go ahead and start building a lot of this stuff. And I'm not sure where you were going with that Hawaiian question, because it's a very complex question. It's a cumulative effect of that, but within that community, there are efforts, very strong efforts, to pull people up to this. We've all recognized it. in life you have choices to make. And sometimes life is not fair. It's something my father would talk about. Life is not fair, but you've got to put yourself in a position to take advantage of those opportunities. And there are people within our community. Daniel and I were talking earlier about some of my passions of doing work in the housing projects, for example. And one of the most moving things that ever happened to me in my life was from 4 enlisted men from the military base, taking 4 hours out of their day to adopt our neighborhood. And they took us away from the base, and they just made us feel special. And what that told me was that my life had value. And that was enough for me to go ahead and take that jump. And that's why I say the solution is a very, may seem simplistic on my part, but very impactful. And so there are things that we can do as individuals to go ahead and move that meter. And it's happening. It's just within the Hawaiian community, we see a lot of discussion about the other things, and it's real. But there's steps that are being taken.
I think that there's so much cause for optimism on that front. I mean, and for really a lot of positive thinking. Because I definitely see, as an educator, the work that's being done in many of the charter schools, and just beginning with Ahapu Manoleo, not just the number of publications in Hawaiian language, reclamation. So much has happened, and we see through that cultures need not be lost or forgotten or disempowered or disenfranchised. But there's much stronger sense of ownership and fundamentally pleasure and power that comes from being Hawaiian. The students that I see, they spend time in places like Ala Farms, Maui Farms, Ho'oluaina, where they do indigenous reforestation. They have a cultural component. Hawaiian practitioners through Lua and Ho'oponopono and systems of restorative justice are working with youth and giving options so that correctional facilities for youth are giving way to sort of more culturally based solutions. And in these and other ways, there are choices now that are present that weren't there, and certainly I wasn't aware of them. So that while we can teach America what it means to be American, I think a lot of Hawaiians here can teach us about the value and power of this place in ways that we can hear now, which is great.
Maya, you mentioned earlier that because we have family connections and we all live together, sometimes people are less likely to confront or be candid. And I just wonder if Guy feels that coming back from North California, Bay Area, where you made your home. When you look at our culture here now, what do you say? Do you see that we tend to get along to get along?
No, I actually see melting pots / salad. It is a delightful society. And I'm not an insider anymore. And it is different from the mainland. But on the other hand, I don't think the mainland is so heinous, right? I can honestly tell you, when I was first asked to be on this panel, I told the person, if you want me to go on this panel and say I had to overcome all this prejudice and I had to overcome all this racism to succeed in this, white Silicon Valley, is simply not true. I have never felt that being Japanese has held me back, or I've been punished, or I've been anything like that. Incompetently, not Japanese. And so I think a lot of that happened because of my upbringing. And the fact that, for me, I travel all over the world, literally all over the world. And my observation is that people are more similar than they are different. And this can be in Istanbul or Venezuela or any place. And so I think one of the real action points is to get people to physically get to know each other, to be in close proximity, and so that can break their stereotypes. They can see that they're not that different. They want to make a better life for their kids. They want to do that. Everybody's kind of the same. But if you are separate, if you're in your own little pipe, then you ascribe characteristics to people because you don't know them. And I think that is a huge mistake. I think America should just welcome immigrants. Thank God we live in a country where people want to come to the country, not escape the country. And so I think we should let them all in. And, and if Donald Trump wins, I am going to move to Australia.
We have 5 minutes before we open up for questions, so please be thinking of what you may want to ask. But before we do that, is there anything you'd like to say before, to make sure you get out, and this is the time, you have 5 minutes of time that you can use. No, 5 minutes total, so it has to be a short, sublime thought.
I'm not capable of
Okay. I would just say that, we do the workshop Seeds of Peace, and I know some Seeds of Peace people are here. Please, it's Seeds with a C, and it connects community, family, and schools together. And please ask yourselves, like, emerging from here, the things that you can do with your children and the children in your life and community to help with the peace building process.
I see minds churning.
Growing up in Hawaii is a very special opportunity for all of us, and to get to influence one's life. And I do work, I've done work in Ramallah, West Bank, different places. And one thing growing up here, and just like I talk about the spirit of aloha, and being able to go into any community in my world travels, and to be able to go in there comfortably with confidence. Because I'm going in there with the idea that I'm there to care about people, to serve people. I'm going to be patient enough to take the time to understand it. I think as Maya was talking about the resurgence of Ahapunana Leo, and that I was reflecting back on my friends that used to go to Japanese school, Japanese language, she used to say, good thing, they got to go to school. In retrospect, you're so fortunate. Because what a lot of the resurgence to your question, your comment about the Hawaiian commentary on that, is because of a rekindling and a re-understanding of our history. And understanding one's history allows you to go ahead and be forthright, be confident, be strong as you go through. So bring up, but it also, for me, in my travels and the work that I do abroad in the Middle East, it's allowed me to take this confidence and to see the similarities that people are there, that are in need of people willing to serve, people willing to care for them. But that also stems from how I was treated by the 60 different families that were in our neighborhood, all the different ethnicities. One thing that they had that was consistent, they cared about me. And they had the right to discipline me, and I had the responsibility of respecting them. And that's something that when we talk about race and diversity, that's what's consistent amongst all cultures, and we've been able to experience that here in Hawaii.
Anybody else? Daniel? Guy?
Okay. Well, just what Corbett and Guy were saying, it just reminds me of this, of the importance of contextualizing one's life. The importance of travel, to understand other places so that you can understand the place where we live, and remembering things like history, so we don't do anything like repeat our mistakes. Those kinds of things are what lead us to get-togethers like tonight. And while we celebrate diversity here, I see this as just one step in a process of getting to a point where we all have an awareness of each other's races and we celebrate it instead of judging or criticizing. Someone once said this to me, it stuck with me. He said, exposure brings acceptance. Acceptance brings understanding. Understanding can bring love. And so, we are somewhere on that spectrum. And I think repeated exposure to one another, living the way that we do here in Hawaii, gives us a head start, because we live together as neighbors, and we are on the path to understanding and love. And that's someplace that is to kind of tie back to the whole thing, what Hawaii can help teach America about race.
So I have to say that I love the idea that exposure is the key. You are not just a pretty face. You are I am really impressed. You are a deep thinker. I'm not a guy.
Cue cards in the back.
Well, I wish I had those cue cards. Obviously, I love that idea of exposure. I'm going to tell you one more story. I like to hammer on the theme that it's about perspective and how you want to view the world, half empty, half full, and how you want to, turn lemon into lemonade, turn lemon into lemon. So my last story for you. So about 15 years ago, I was driving in Northern California on El Camino Real, which is the main drag. It's Kamakawa Avenue of Silicon Valley. And at the time, I had a Porsche 911. So I stop at the stoplight, and I look to my left, and I see this car with 4 white teenage girls. And they're laughing and giggling, and they're making eye contact with me. So I think, Guy, you have truly arrived. Just like Justin Bieber, anybody knows who you are. It's because of your work at Apple, your writing, your speaking, your books. You have truly arrived, Guy. So one of the teenage girls makes this motion of rolling down her window. Obviously not a Porsche owner because you press a button to put down the window. But anyway, so I put down my window. She leans out of the car in the next lane and she says to me, "Are you Jackie Chan?" Now, I could have gotten all bent out of shape. I could have said, not all Asians, we're not all slant eyes, we're not all the same. Okay, I could have got bent out of shape. But I'll tell you something. That day, I decided one of my goals in life was that someday Jackie Chan would be driving his Rolls Royce in Hong Kong. He would look over, see these teenage girls, giggling, smiling, making eye contact. "Roll down your Rolls Royce window, Jackie." Puts down his window, and she says to him, "Are you Guy Kawasaki?" That's my last story.
Thank you. And now it's time for questions and answers.
Indeed, we have saved some time to take questions from all of you. There are 2 of us with microphones going around. Please raise your hand. We got to get you over to the microphone. This is being recorded. It'll be up on whatitmeanstobeamerican.org first thing tomorrow morning. You can share it with friends, family, students, colleagues, whomever you'd like who could not make it out to this wonderful event tonight. Josephine's got the first question on the left.
Hello. I really enjoyed this panel. You guys are really great and versatile. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit under Makofa. I just had a question regarding the current institutionalized racism against last peoples to arrive Micronesians. I wanted to know, what your thoughts are on what could be done to further integrate them into our melting pot salad outside of the realms of academia, these socio-politically conscious spaces, like outside of these protected spaces. You know what I mean? Because I work, in the community doing psychiatric social work and therapy, and it's bad out there. Like hospitals, schools, being out in people's homes, common areas like restaurants, it's getting increasingly worse. The discrimination towards Micronesians, and so I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Oh, sure. I don't know if they're going to see me.
I'm fine, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I definitely think that a big part of it is making sure that there are Micronesian leaders at the table. The Consul General is a good guy. We did a Seeds of Peace workshop in Kealakekee Complex on Kona side, Hawaii Island, and there had been some strife there. It was relatively well publicized, and so much happened there in the Micronesian community. There was a lot of understanding, shared bureau building, a walk, conversations about how to impact public policy, conversations about how to get on Obamacare, all of these things really do need to happen with Micronesians at the table. So I think creating those spaces, and I think that storytelling is just a really important part of building empathy. So telling more and more stories belonging to the Micronesian community and understanding the great variety and richness, but also the challenges of such linguistic diversity. So many languages, so many islands, and a lot of cultural distinctions make it very difficult to to come to some kind of understanding and to build cultural bridges, but it definitely is possible. So I, again, just encourage you to start with the schools and really making sure that you're pushing into the communities and you're inviting people out, and then make sure that people like, Joja and Kofa Khan and, some of the other organizations that are working on advocacy are also thinking in empowered ways about how to increase the number of stories told and the number of the representation.
Yeah, I do think that I did a lot of work with the Micronesian community for years when I was going to school in Oregon, and I still do work with them, is to having our community get a much more complete understanding that they're from different islands, they have different cultures. And to also set a timeline and establish a timeline that's not our timeline, to recognize that where they start from, or they started at a different place than many of the people here in Hawaii at this present time, and to be patient and to structure things and to develop a supportive structure around them to help them through those steps, but to set it in a way that's going to be beneficial to them, to take care of their children. There's a way to do it. But I think sometimes some of the sense of urgency that's been created by the need to address some of these issues that we see that are real visible, we're just touching the edge of it. And so as Maya's been talking about, the peace conferences gaining a greater understanding, and it's a responsibility for all of us to get to learn more about their cultures, their different people, that they do come from different islands, that they're not all one and the same, because many of the solutions that are coming out are addressing it as one and the same. It's not one and the same. Yeah. And so having that sensitivity, so it's there's a lot of work to do that we're all responsible for.
Next question back here.
Hello everyone, my name is Noah Catano. So thank you very much for the talk tonight. I do want to, I don't know how many of you have seen the film Aloha. It was a little controversial, but one of the best things about it is Bumpy Cunahan is wearing a shirt, and the shirt says, Hawaiian by blood, American by force. And so I do think that there is a conversation that we're sort of not having or speaking around, which is what is it? It's easy to say, what does it mean to be local? It is more difficult to say, what does it mean to be an American in a place that has colonized Hawaii for over a century? And so when we talk about socioeconomic issues that are affecting Hawaiians, these are direct consequences of it. Even when we're talking about the Punana or the language revitalization, all of these efforts are still being done within the context of a hopeful future nationhood. And I'll say that having worked for Senator Noai, that he, as much as we're talking about multiculturalism, he would say that Native Hawaiians have a special status here. And so I want to bring up this issue and delve a little bit more deeper into what I think is a more complicated issue than just the multicultural love fest that is here in America.
With respect, that's a terrific question, because I do feel that, I do sense it, and I experienced it. I grew up, as I mentioned, we're on welfare, first to go to school. My father never graduated from school. A lot of challenges growing up. Ate food out of rubbish cans, did the whole thing. Hand-me-down clothes. Never was able to qualify for one homeland because we had too many kids. Always worried about moving every week because we couldn't pay our rent. A lot of pain out there. One thing that my father and my mother, and culturally, I was raised very powerfully. Auntie Yolanda Guahini was my teacher. I was up in Honolulu when I was 6 years old. I learned to Holi. I did all of the cultural pieces. One of the things that I experienced, though, during that time, that from all of my teachers, was that you have a choice to make. And as all of the different oppressive things that have gone on with respect to the Hawaiian community, not only committed by the different governments that came in, but committed by our own ali'i. There's a full story to tell. We learn from that. We learn that what steps do we have, what power do we have within ourselves. First, it's education. There will be a time that I think there's going to be an opportunity for some type of independent steps. There was an attempt by Senator Akaka to put together the Native Hawaiian recognition bill, And I worked on that first draft. I did the first draft with a group of people from the community, all the different community groups were there. Palahui, Bumpy, the whole group was there at that time. Bumpy and I are classmates from high school. But it's just the efforts there, but the fact that we've got education as a ticket for us to go ahead and now be in a plane where we have a Center for Hawaiian Studies that has been a very strong advocate. My niece is the attorney up on top of Mama Kip. Camille with TNT, I'm in Israel, she sends me this picture of her up there with the hula. My other nephew, Kanuha, is up there on the hill. I've met with Dr. Yang on that piece there, but had I not been educated and had I not been exposed through my Hawaiian language and Hawaiian culture, I would never have had that opportunity. And then on the other side, in addition to that, the fact that Senator Inouye was very instrumental in creating pathways where I would be able to go and sit with people to even show my views and share my views has been very opportunistic for me. So I agree with you. I feel the pain, and that's happening. But what you do see is you see a number of educated Hawaiians out there being able to sit at the table and talk about their history. One of the things that we talk about, not to go too long, but history is so important, is what was lacking within our Hawaiian community to a large extent was understanding of our own genealogies. So one of the things that's happening in all of our families is to teach genealogy, to teach what was going on in the world at that same time, so that when you get involved in a discussion, you're informed as to what was going on in the world at that time, so that we can go into a situation where people, there's a relationship of trust that goes on. That the Hawaiian culture is an inclusive culture. It has always been. And how do we move the community to see the value? I've seen a great amount of change over time from when I was a child, and in terms of accessibility and in terms of acceptance of the Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian music and ancient music. So it's just we can continue our conversation, but it's very fascinating position.
I think you've noted that this is a serious discussion, that this is discussional by itself as well. Do we have time for more questions and answers, Dulcie?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having this conversation. It's very interesting. So I moved here with my family 8 years ago from Louisville, Kentucky. And it was funny, when I moved here, everyone, because I was in elementary school at the time, everyone called me Kentucky. That was my nickname. No one called me by my name. But one thing I was struck with as soon as I got here was that part of the reason for everyone's inclusivity was that everyone was able to understand our common humanity. And so my question to you would be is, what role do you think social media and other technologies will play in helping everyone, not just in the country, but in the world, realize our common humanity?
Guy, that sounds like a question for you if I've ever heard it.
Set me up with a softball. I think social media is utterly fantastic. It's fast, it's free, it's ubiquitous. Nobody can tell you if you're a dog on the internet, much less what race you are. So I think it breaks down a lot of barriers. It's more or less a meritocracy about the quality of what you do on social media. And you really don't need to reveal your race, your color, your religious, your sexual orientation, anything. All of that kind of disappears. And now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of trolls, there's a lot of evil people, there's a lot of stupid people, I block them regularly. But I think it's a great empowering thing. It's utterly fantastic for marketing, for all this kind of stuff. It's the best thing. I have friends and people I know all over the world that could not have possibly maintain a relationship were it not for the internet. There's no doubt in my mind. It expands your mind.
Can I just add to that also that I was talking about this earlier. My brother has some contractors, and so one of them kind of found me on Facebook and said some not so nice things about our family, and they were downright mean, and I followed her to her Facebook page. And it was a really important lesson to me, one that I share with my students, because while there were certain things that were expected, she was sort of a Tea Party person. And so her icon was a woman, rather buxom, wrapped in an American flag, toting a rifle. But I looked a little deeper because she had hurt my feelings. And I saw next some pictures of her kissing up on some kittens and with her very beautiful grandchildren. And it was sort of a moment where it became impossible for me to completely demonize her. Am I fond of her? No. Do I want her over for tea? No. But there was this moment where I recognized, you know what, she is doing the best she knows how with her family. And I do think that even with people with whom we have very strong political and social differences, social media also allows us to understand other people's stories and to, as you were saying, to humanize everyone. And it's actually useful because it takes away that element of fear, when we can't other others, that we begin to find ourselves a little more resourceful and brave about trying to think about connecting with a larger percentage of humanity. Again, please don't invite me.
We've got our last question over here on the left.
How's it? My name is Ken Lee. Thank you guys all for coming out here. I was invited here by my friend Neens, and I was all, what the hell is this? She usually invites me to good events, so I figured I'd show up. And it actually ended up being really educational. Thank you guys for your time. I have part commentary and part question. So like Kamal was saying, when you grew up, 60 people, right? So basically a village raised you. And I believe a lot of that's been lost in our society nowadays. And a lot of that has come because of the labeling. I didn't grow up as an American Hawaiian. And I'm sure, Guy, you didn't grow up as a Japanese American, but you're now labeled Japanese American. And I think a lot of the labeling has separated us as people, as a nation, and even somewhat within the Hawaiian culture, the melting pot, the salad, as it was called. There's been a lot of separation due to labeling. The question is, how do we go backward and teach people what it is like to be family, regardless of what your color, your ethnic background, who your mom or dad is, how much money you have or don't have. Like Kamal, I grew up on welfare, food stamps, Midwest, all that stuff. So how do we go back with having so much media available through social media and all these different outlets? How do we go back and educate not just our children we're raising now, but the adults that lost their way? How do we go about doing that, not just as a society, but as individuals?
I think Dave came already answered this question. It's about exposure. I think that's the key. Exposure to other cultures and other people. If you just live in your little island, I'm not referring to walk, but if you live in your own little stovepipe, that won't happen. By the way, the person who just asked the question is like world champion surfer, stand up out for the water.
I didn't answer his question because that's my cousin.
Yeah. He's like the LeBron James of surfing.
What I will say is that, if you look at Corbin's family history and his descendants, you have one of your answers right there. When you have every ethnicity coming into your family history, you're going to be a lot less likely to make fun of yourself, because you're part Portuguese or whatever that is. And so, I think progress comes through time, progress comes through dialogue, and the relationships that we all make together inform the future. And so, like when Corbin was talking about his ethnic makeup, I just You know, instead of calling it local, I just call it the future, because eventually we're all going to get to this place. So, you know, instead of putting it as a how do we go back to that place, you know, I look forward to it as how do we get to that place? Because labels, ethnic names are just that, names. It's the values that we place on them that we need to change. And so, you know, hopefully we get to a point where whatever ethnicity you are is not looked at as a way to hurt someone or make someone feel less than. So I think with every generation we make progress.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up.